What if you could know what is true and prove it to others by simply being true to yourself? That's right, kids. Stay in school. What am I doing with my life? Anyways, you read the title, and jokes aside, I'm not going to be able to comprehensively teach you how to debate in a short little video. That's what Philosophy from Intuition is for. But obviously, long serialized content is not everyone's cup of tea. And this video series is something I want to get right. I want to take my time with it, which means it may be years before it's finished. So what about for right now, especially if you aren't one of my followers? Well, there are several short little rules that I follow that help me construct an argument. Obviously, just briefly going over them isn't going to encapsulate their abilities and limitations to the fullest extent possible. But if you're just looking for a quick and easy idea of how to reliably make an argument, here is probably the biggest rule in my rulebook. Just be honest. Now, what do I mean by that? What is the purpose? Obviously, I could say some pseudo-zen thing and be like, oh, it helps you to look inside yourself and understand the world. But obviously, as true as that may be, it's a little more complicated when we're talking about it in terms of debate. So let's start with a comment that has made some people really mad in the past when I've brought it up. And it's this: if you make an argument and there is no way in which that argument could theoretically be proven wrong, then there is no basis for that argument. You can tell yourself that it makes sense, but it doesn't. It is something you believe because you want to, not because there's a logical reason to believe it. Now, in explaining why that is, and hopefully leaving no room for doubt, I want to pick out a word there that is usually a point of contention for many when I explain this to them, and that word is theoretically. I am not saying physically. I am not even saying it must be possible. Nor am I saying you must believe that you are wrong in order to prove that you are right, which is just one of the most aneurysm-inducing set of comments that I have ever had to read, because last time I introduced this concept in a video, some people legitimately thought that that was the point I was trying to make. No, and for example, some genius came along and was like, well, what about math? Which is just kind of like, well, what about it? Because it's difficult to undermine the importance of what I'm saying, or at least what you think I'm saying, when things like hyperbolic geometry and imaginary numbers only came about when people challenged their preconceived notions by asking the question, what if we're wrong? Which again, is not what I'm teaching you, although it is a valuable point to meditate on. I am saying if I think that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and somehow someone came along and proved to me that 2 is not 1 plus 1, or that 4 is not 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, then I would concede that it doesn't inherently follow that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Again, it doesn't have to be possible, just that you can propose a standard by which you could be wrong, because here we are literally just explaining why 2 plus 2 equals 4 by explaining what it means for something to be 2 and what it means for something to be 4. In Descartes' I think therefore I am, a statement most rationalists consider unfalsifiable, if Descartes didn't think and there weren't any other standards by which he could be, then he wouldn't be. So in short, the emphasis of this method of inquiry shouldn't be arbitrarily placed on the plausibility of a falsifying statement. It is the very idea that a statement should be able to be falsified as a conditional. If not, that's like having a light on in your house, going down to your breaker box, flipping every switch off, but the light stays on. Not only does that not really make any sense, it is clear that this light is not dependent on this breaker. Substitute the light for your statement and the breaker box for, well, everything and anything. If your statement cannot be switched off, then nothing ever switched it on. It is not based on anything. But now, how can we take this and make good arguments? Well, first, clearly we've grounded ourselves in firm deductive reasoning. If you have a hypothesis, you could find what would prove it false. If that thing is likely to be true, then your hypothesis is likely to be false. You go on like this until what can prove you false cannot be true. And having exhausted all other possibilities, now you know that you have a sound argument. Likewise, this method of inquiry allows us to establish incredibly fair inductive standards, as avoiding self-contradiction is the entire point of this model. You would not use, for example, a standard like murder is the unlawful killing of a human being, because then it would make any attempt to establish an unfalsifiable standard for the statement genocide is murder impossible. We could simply prove ourselves wrong by saying genocide is not murder if it is lawful, or any such unsavory example where opening the door for a conclusion in one argument creates a refutation in another. Under this principle, we begin to ask ourselves if it would be fair if the standards we use against others were used against us ourselves. And it may seem as though this honesty and fairness puts us at a disadvantage. However, a means by which we can leverage this is that everyone should reasonably operate under this principle. It wasn't just your beliefs that were baseless because you couldn't justify them. It was mine and everyone else's as well. If we wish to actually find a basis for our arguments and defend ourselves against your newfound knowledge, we must adopt these principles as well, in which I should suggest no standard in support of one conclusion that contradicts my other conclusions, nor should you. Now, obviously, there will be those that don't care that their claims are baseless and don't want to participate in an honest conversation, and unfortunately, there isn't much we can really do about that. There may also be inconsolable differences between two who do adopt it, as it only really motivates logical consistency and doesn't offer a method by which a statement can be verified as true through any objective lens. But for any criticism you may offer up, such as if one could use ridiculous, unfalsifiable statements as their basis for proof, not only should I remind you what word was brought up several times throughout the intro, honesty, for which this method kind of fails without it, like I said, but also ask yourself, do I want to listen to this guy go on for another probably 5 hours that would be necessary to ground this in a larger epistemological framework? Or am I just content with taking the food for thought as is? I would say it's up to you, but